This is the Baunfire Gaming Podcast, episode 358. I'm your host, Morgan, aka Bon Diesel, and this week we'll be talking about Battlefield 6's positive reception, more Xbox drama because it's endless, PlayStation 6 rumors, and much more. Be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app, leave a review on Spotify or iTunes, and subscribe to the Bon Diesel YouTube channel to get all of my videos, including this podcast. Let's jump into the gaming news. Battlefield 6 has been released. It has an open critic score of 84. I have jumped into it for an hour and a half or so before I recorded this. I was going to record first, and then I decided I wanted to play. And it's what I expected. It's great. It's really exciting. It's funny because I played a bunch of the beta, really liked it. Went back and played a ton of Battlefield 2042 to unlock all the rewards for 6, and got used to that again. Now it's back to this. There's some stuff that seems like it's a little off, things that they're going to have to adjust and things like that. I think more than anything, it's just getting used to a very different art style with 2040 with 6 from 2042. There's also the inherent Battlefield 6. This is going to take me forever to figure out to switch back. 6 runs extremely well. It's been talked about really widely for how well it runs and how good it looks and all that. It is different, right? Like 2042 ran insanely well on the current gen systems because that game was also on the last gen systems. And so the simple fact is it's just not going to run as well, or at least it may not feel like it at first. There's also gameplay decisions that have happened. 2042 was a arguably arcadey game. They changed a lot of the gameplay and the way that game felt. And that's what a lot of people didn't like about it. I kind of liked it. I didn't hate it, at least, even though I do appreciate the more grounded kind of, more immersive way the old Battlefield games had, and now Battlefield 6 has kind of returned to. Overall, I'm having a blast though. I haven't played enough to give my whole thoughts on it. I haven't played the single player yet. Apparently it's only a few hours. I'm planning on actually recording that and posting the whole playthrough. But overall, it seems like a huge success. When I was trying to log in, I tried to log in and there was like an 80,000 person wait list. It's like, okay, a queue. That's not too bad. Got to 0, had an error. Did it again. It was like 200,000. Got to 0. Error again. And this is when, obviously other people are having this issue as well. You start seeing the tweets flying and people being all silly. It's like, guys, this is a game that like millions of people are going to play this game today. Everyone, there's probably multiple millions of people trying to get on at that moment, right when it dropped for the entire world. Give them 30 minutes. They'll figure it out. Like it'll even out. And that's exactly what happened. My third try, I got in, started playing, messing with the settings, trying to dial the game in, the controls and the visuals and all that to what I prefer. Pretty impressed so far, but probably on the next episode, I'll do a deeper dive into it. More than likely, I'll just do a video and maybe reference back to that. There was some kind of silliness around it. One of the things that was kind of funny was the reviews have been pretty solid. It has an 84 open critic, which combines all of the platforms into one score. If you ever notice, Metacritic does not do that. I think they normally show, I assume, the platform with the most reviews, because like I believe on Metacritic, Battlefield 6 has like an 88 for Xbox, but there's I think a couple dozen reviews there, where the majority of reviews on that I think are on PlayStation, and that score is I think 84 as well. So keep that in mind if you care about those scores. The one outlier has been kind of funny. It's IGN, and part of the reason they're an outlier is that with multiplayer games like this, they often review the campaign and they review the multiplayer separately. So right now they have a multiplayer in progress review happening. So they haven't put that score out yet. Obviously it just opened up, but they put out a score for the single player from Simon Cardy, who I'm kind of surprised got assigned this game. I'm not under the impression they are this kind of game's audience, but that doesn't matter necessarily. They gave it a 5 out of 10. They're catching a lot of shit for that. I will say, from what I've seen, I haven't played it yet. I will, and I'll give my thoughts on it when I do. But I'm under the impression that the single player is okay. Like the campaign is not very good. It's not, battle, Call of Duty 2019, that Modern Warfare reboot that, in my opinion, has one of the best campaigns ever. Right? It's so good. I'm under the impression that there's actually a mission. If you remember, or if you played Modern Warfare, that reboot back in 2019, there's that house mission where you go through a house and clear it. It's heavily scripted. There's a little bit of dynamic to it, but it's a cool mission. It looks cool. It sounds cool. It is tense. That mission did a really good job of scripting like the other NPCs to kind of keep you from just running through the whole house and clearing it yourself. There's some very obvious planning done to make sure you kind of have to follow the team and you see the things that they want you to see. Apparently there's a battlefield mission for 6 they kind of tried to do the same thing, but they didn't do all of that heavy scripting, which is like kind of a Battlefield thing. They don't want to restrict you as much. And apparently you can finish the mission in like 2 minutes because you can just run through the whole house, jumping around, shooting everything. And it's not exactly the same experience. So I'm under the impression that score of 5 out of 10 may be warranted to a point. But what sucks about the way these aggregators work, I thought the outlets submitted their scores. According to the former editor at IGN who chirped at me on Blue Sky, which was kind of funny. It was totally fair. The scores get automatically pulled by the aggregators. So OpenCritic, Metacritic, all that. So I don't know if it's also going to count the multiplayer score when it comes out, or if that would replace the single player score, or if nothing happens. I actually went back to Call of Duty Black Ops 6 to see what happened with IGN scoring, because I believe they do the same thing with that. And it just straight up didn't count an IGN score last year. So who knows? It seems like there's probably someone who makes a decision on that, and maybe it's not consistent. It's not really that big of a deal, though. It's okay for people not to like a game. PlayStation also did something weird, and I've seen zero press on it. And maybe it's because I'm like an Xbox fanboy or whatever. So if that's what it is, chalk it up to that. Call me an Xbot or whatever, and make fun of me because my favorite brand is like slowly deteriorating. We'll get to that later. But PlayStation just straight up has a play to win deal with EA. It's insane that they did it, that EA let them do it. But everyone has a price. At the end of the day, it means that PlayStation players of Battlefield 6 are going to get a 5% boost on XP. Not the biggest deal. Like, I get it. I understand. At the end of the day, it's not going to make that big of a difference. It does add up over time. And I'm not positive how long that lasts. It's probably just like 30 days or something. But it's just like, and we'll get into this in the next story, but you can't tell me that like if Xbox did this, or like Epic Games or something, I don't know, that people wouldn't just lose their collective minds. And literally this story has like briefly popped up a little with like no reception, like no one cares. And so maybe it's not that big of a deal. Maybe I'm just being a victim or whatever. Maybe I'm being too much of a fanboy or whatever. But like, I just find it hard to believe that if another platform was doing this, specifically Xbox, this wouldn't be like, oh, look at Xbox trying to pay to get people like, no. Maybe I'm looking for controversy where there isn't any. It's still kind of lame in my opinion, but is what it is. Regardless, Battlefield 6 having a big release. I'm expecting it's going to sell pretty well. It's we'll see how the ongoing player base and the ongoing support happens. I suspect they're going to be okay. I know I'm going to play a crap ton of this game. What's exciting about Battlefield 6 coming out is knowing this, like, man, I'm probably going to play this game for like the next like 3 or 4 years. And that's kind of neat, right? There's been the rumors that Battlefield supposedly is going to start putting out games a little more often, maybe every year, every 2 years. That sounds like it may be possible with this acquisition that is likely about to go through early next year. So we'll see how that plays out. I would certainly hope that instead they would just focus on doing like maybe big DLCs or something like that. I think that the annualization of Call of Duty is already such a big deal and seems to kind of hurt that brand more than it helps, even though it still sells like crazy. I don't think we should want that from Battlefield as well, but maybe there's an audience for it. I have a feeling they're going to test that theory. Okay, getting into the second story here. Xbox hardware, next gen Xbox has been canceled, but it actually hasn't. This kind of turns into a bigger topic. So I'm going to talk about what happened here. And then, I've probably said this stuff 100 times. I'm going to say it 101 times. Just kind of talking about the kind of the vibe around Xbox, not really even by people who actually play it, but by people who cover it and are in its like atmosphere. But let's start with what happened here. So basically some forum users and Tom Warren, who is a quote unquote journalist, supposedly, who has his own like little private blog that he, does things to push people towards pretty heavily, in my opinion, things that, you could argue are ethical or not, claimed that they had sources that said that Xbox was, going to cancel their next gen plans. And that, that was written off and it wasn't going to happen anymore. So the way this stuff always happens, especially with Xbox, specifically with Xbox, this rumor shoots around for 10, 12 hours. And then other people who are like more consistently connected and sources of info for Xbox and Microsoft in general start piping up being like, this isn't true. Like this, there's no one of note who's confirming this anonymously, or who wants to be kept anonymous. But like one outlet, I think it was Windows Central, was like, hey, like we broke details about the Series X, the Series S, release dates for those consoles, all this Xbox, the ABK acquisition. Like, they had this like litany of things of like, hey, like we obviously have really good sourcing inside of Xbox and we can confirm this isn't true. Like nothing about this is true. One of my favorite things about this is one of the PlayStation fanboy accounts posted something. I don't even know what it was. And Tom Warren, the same person who lied about this story, quote tweeted them. It was like, hey, you just can't make stuff up. And like, this was literally like 2 hours after his story about this Xbox thing was disputed. The comments were so satisfying in that, people being like, dude, hypocrite, like what are you talking about? And he of course was like, well, my source told me this was true and I believe them. It's like, dude, okay, but like it doesn't seem like that's true. I mean, this is just it's every month, right? Like every month someone pops off with some rumor about Xbox, it gets a ton of attention, and then someone more reputable or Xbox themselves who also disputed this, they're like, no, we're hard at work on the next gen, blah blah blah. Someone responds and that gets 1/10 of the attention. And then the general atmosphere stays about the original rumor or the sentiments from it. And then what has happened, and what I think this has almost driven me crazier than the initial false rumor from people like Tom Warren and everyone who ran with it, is then you have people like Jez Corden, Ryan McCaffrey, these people who like seem like they kind of come off as like Xbox fans, or not even Xbox fans, but people who just try to, at one point at least, try to like speak truth to this stuff. Like, hey, like, these rumors, this, whatever, like, here's the truth, or here's what's really going on. They both, and other people as well, of course, had articles come out after this initial rumor of Xbox Series 12 or whatever they're going to call it, that it is still happening. It gets disputed. It gets shown like, hey, that's not true. That console's still coming. But then these same people who are like the ones confirming that they are still making hardware, then have these opinion pieces come out, be like, well, the reason those rumors spread around so fast is because they're so believable. And then like Ryan McCaffrey had this story this week where it was like, this generation of Xbox will be known for greed. And it's like, geez, like, come on. Like, I think what's hard for me is that it's a thing you'll see me talk about a lot. It's mostly with Xbox. You'll see me bring this up with like reporting on EA and BioWare as well, or even Ubisoft and others. Like any of these brands that are basically just like targets for journalists, because they know if they throw something out that's negative about them, it's going to do well. Like, whether it's clicks or engagement or whatever. Like Tom Warren knew when he threw out that rumor. Like maybe he had a source who told him that. He probably didn't have sources who told him that, multiple people. but he didn't probably care. He knew that he could throw this story out, that he was going to be sourced by every major outlet and a bunch of minor outlets and influencers and content creators for this story. And that even if he ended up, as what happened, Xbox, denies what he said was true. Multiple other connected people deny what he said was true. He doesn't care because a bunch of people signed up for his paid blog to read the story. And his name got sourced everywhere. And the response, all the articles then following this up being like, actually, maybe this wasn't true. Like I said before, get 1/10 of the attention of that initial rumor. Right. And that, combined with this thing where even these people who kind of seem to, try to tell the truth about these things, to try to put out like the facts about it, or actual sourced information about it, they realize too, like, well, I can ride this train as well. So I'm going to say that, actually that rumor isn't true, but it's believable. And here's why. And then it just turns into another thing. It's just like, it's so frustrating because this stuff it's engagement bait, right? Like it's designed to take those people who have, Kratos in their profile picture and their bio on social media is like PlayStation super fan since blah, 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 and all of their posts, they don't have any posts. They're all retweets, and they're all retweets of all the fanboy accounts for PlayStation. And all of their replies, if you look at their replies, are them being like, oh, Xbox did, blah, blah, like that's the audience for this kind of story. And even the people who dispute the story, still reach out to that audience. And because it's not about telling the truth, giving analysis, doing any of these things that, like, in theory, journalism is supposed to do. It's about getting clicks on your website or your blog or your video or your social media account to make money off of that. Like, I think we're in such a bad situation right now when it comes to the games journalism industry that, like, there is very little, if any, desire to educate people, to do investigative stories, to explain things, to give context, to give explanations. There's none of that. And I used to even say that, like, Jason Schreier was the last person who I think was really doing that, because he was getting jobs at the right places at Kotaku and now Bloomberg and stuff, where he, like, kind of didn't have to worry about that rigmarole. And either because it's a personal a personal mission or whatever, even he's like kind of fallen into this stuff. And he normally does it with very specific brands that he seems to kind of hate for whatever reason. But, like, there's just there's no like adults in the room being like, okay, these guys I get what they're doing, but this sucks. Here's why Xbox raised the price of Game Pass. It may not make you happy, but here's why they did it. It's not just because of greed. It's not just because Lena Khan failed at, stopping the acquisition of ABK, which we'll talk about in a minute. Like, it's for, probably because Microsoft has dumped billions of dollars in AI and they're getting zero return from it. Like, it's things like that, but no one, those articles, I'm sure they get written. I'm sure someone explains these things. I'm sure someone does this stuff. Maybe some of the very people who I think are propagating the worst part of this stuff, but they don't get any attention. And maybe that's no one's fault. Maybe it's no one's fault that, the truth or actual explanations and things like that don't get half the attention that rumors do. But, like, it just seems like there's so much bad faith reporting and bad faith, influencers and content creators and stuff who, like, they aren't out there to, like, talk about something they're passionate about, to, speculate or give, factual information about these things. They're just out there to get that 10,000 subscribers, to get that 100,000 subscribers, to get that 100,000 view video, or, to pump up their Twitter so they get a paycheck from Elon at the end of the month. Like, there's just no integrity. There's no curiosity. There's just no one, stemming this. And it would be less frustrating for me as someone who is admittedly an Xbox fan, who hasn't been a fun couple of years. For me, so little of my outrage is about things that Xbox has actually done or said. Some of the stuff, yeah, I don't love it all. Like, I can criticize as much as anybody can, and I often do, even if it doesn't come through very much. But, like, my main issue is just that, like, Nintendo and PlayStation do plenty of stupid things and kind of anti-consumer, kind of evil things all the time, weekly. And they get reported kind of, and hits the stories and disappears in 20 minutes. Like there's no, and so, and it's weird, especially both of them. It's strange too, because in theory, you would think the focus would be on, the market leaders. You would think Xbox would have like no attention on them at all. And that's what's kind of strange about it, is that, PlayStation's doubling up or even more how many PlayStations they've sold over Xboxes this gen. Nintendo's off there kind of doing their own thing, but still in the same market, killing it as well. But like Xbox still gets all of the focus, and it's weird. It doesn't make any sense, right? One explanation for that, something I looked up a while ago, you can look up Google Trends and compare like engagement on certain search terms on Google. And so you can, if you type in Xbox and compare it to Nintendo and PlayStation over the last 20 plus years, you can look up all those stats. Xbox, with literally a handful of exceptions for extremely short amounts of time, Xbox has twice the engagement on Google as PlayStation or Nintendo for the last 20 years. Like, it's such a weird phenomena or whatever, because the third place brand has consistently had way more, searches and engagement and stuff like that. And I think that's what drives a lot of this negativity. And, they do make maybe their fair share of mistakes that are easy to jump on. And then thus these rumors and stuff are more easily believable and spread because, of previous issues. But like, it's frustrating. And then you have like former industry people. Got Laura Fryer, who was part of the founding group of Xbox and was the lead on some of the early developed games, hasn't been in the industry for 20 years, has jumped into the culture war stuff in the really gross way and very exploitative and very clickbaity. And like, I think she sucks. I think she's awful. And she's boring and her videos are terrible, but she rings this anti-Xbox bell all the time, and it's been very lucrative for her. She gets articles written about her. There's never articles about Laura Fryer talking about how, this one game company could, do this or that. Like she never is in the news about positive things. It's just whenever she chirps up about Xbox, she pops up. You have Sean Layden, who despises Game Pass and constantly talks about it in ways where he obviously doesn't get it, or he does and he just doesn't want to, because he knows he can say the thing. He's a former PlayStation exec. Like, he knows that he can just say stuff that isn't true or is dumb, but there's so many people who will just be cool with it and who will, clap and say, yeah, right, and share it and make articles and, videos about it, right? And then you have even Mike Ybarra, who was with Xbox in some capacity for a long time, does the same thing. He hates Xbox. Like, he despises Xbox. There was like interaction not long ago where he said something stupid. Someone clapped back like, dude, like, you seem bitter. And he just responded with, your favorite console is dead. It's like, Jesus. Like, it's weird. It's a weird thing. And I don't want to get political about it, and I won't, but there's just so many mirrored things of like, maybe in both of those worlds, people have just accepted that the truth doesn't matter, and whatever makes you feel good or whatever you want to be true is the best thing, and that's what becomes the most popular. And that's strange. It's really weird. And then the final bit about this that I'll rant about is Lena Khan, who was the FCT head under Biden during the last U.S. presidential administration, did a bunch of really great stuff. There's obviously industries she really understood well, or had people in her office who really understood well. Bunch of consumer protection stuff, did a bunch of really good work, and just completely dropped the ball with the Activision Blizzard King acquisition by Xbox. They fought it, and they fought a terrible case. They basically were, the problem is that they handled that case trying to get concessions from Xbox or to block the deal entirely. Kind of trying to treat Xbox like they were the market leader and that this was going to make them a monopoly. And that just wasn't true. And there was even, and what has happened since then, they didn't instantly become the number one game company after that acquisition, to this day, even, it seems like they have made big strides in revenue and profit margin, things like that, which is arguably a bigger deal. But at the end of the day, no one thinks that since that deal, Xbox is the biggest game publisher at this point, or platform. Nothing's really changed in my opinion, at least, and maybe I'm biased, but even just recently she was like, see, like, look how, Xbox is raising the price of Game Pass and the price of their consoles 5 years into the generation. This is what I was warning people about, and it's what I was talking about before. Like, it does seem like, and there's another story we'll get into here in a little bit about Call of Duty. I'm sure Call of Duty being on Game Pass has incentivized them to be like, we probably need to raise our prices a little bit on Game Pass. The Xbox consoles, they just aren't making many. They aren't selling many. So the ones they're getting in are more expensive because of tariffs. They're charging more for them. They don't want to charge more for them. That is not greed. It's not greed to raise the price of an item that everyone knows isn't selling. Different conversation, I guess. But like, it's just, to me, the Khan's like whole, reiteration of this on some random YouTuber, he's like a fairly big YouTuber, isn't a gaming YouTuber, was just going along with everything she was saying because he doesn't know anything about what she's talking about. And she kind of seems like she doesn't either. Like, there's all this, it's so funny. It's like right now, if like people were like going after Nissan for like ruining the car, the car industry. It's like, guys, like Nissan may not even exist 5 years from now. Like, they are such a tiny, insignificant player that, maybe you should focus on the people who are actually driving the industry at this point, which is, not Nissan for the car industry and is not Xbox for the games industry. But she threw out the statement. Of course, it caught on to all the, expected people, and that becomes the big story. And now there's a bunch of people, kind of normies or people who don't pay super close attention to this because of these rumors, because of these people who kind of seem to be Xbox fans, but don't really act like it. And to be a fan doesn't mean you have to always be positive and never criticizing stuff, but it's to just be truthful about things and try to put things in the real context and stuff. These former executives who are popping off for whatever reason. And then you have this FTC person saying, like, we forget how few people in the gaming community are on social media, on YouTube, on Twitch, getting involved in all these conversations. It's a pretty small percentage of people, but this greater kind of message leaks out and reaches the greater community, and they don't look into it. They just see like, oh, the FTC, the former government person, said that, this is happening for this reason, even though it may not be completely true. And it's just, it's weird. It's strange. Maybe this is me and my, the dying breaths of my favorite brand. Maybe a year or 5 years from now, I'm gonna look back and be like, okay, maybe I was wrong about all this. But I think the perception of Xbox that you get from being on social media, from paying probably too much attention to this stuff, is different than the reality. I suspect that a lot of this stuff isn't as big of a deal as it's made, because it's being made a big deal so people can make money. And if money wasn't the goal, these stories would at least be approached differently, maybe from a place of more curiosity, context, and truth. But maybe I'm wrong. I guess we'll find out one day. Moving over to PlayStation, we have Ghost of Yotei has released. It is only on PS5 right now. It got an open critic score of 87. Reviews of this game have been interesting, mostly because I've watched Kind of Funny and a few others, talk about it. And it's basically, they improved a lot from Tsushima. They, the new characters, the new story, all that. Like, it's kind of cookie cutter, whether you want to say cookie cutter for the Ghost series now or for PlayStation single player games in general. But it seems really enjoyed. People like playing it. It's a fun game. Looks great. All that. But it's definitely a sequel. Like it's very much a sequel. I think it's kind of the overall statement. What's been interesting about it is a pushback on SkillUp. So SkillUp is someone I've been familiar with for a really long time at this point. He started off as The Division content creator, which is where I started as well. Actually, at one point, I could like DM him and we could chat. He's kind of grown beyond that, and I kind of don't want to talk to him at this point for various reasons. But he is catching a lot of hell for his review, where he straight up is like, this is bad. And what's interesting is there's so much reaction to this. There's the people reacting directly to about his review, like, oh, this is bullcrap. It's a good game. He's wrong, blah, blah, blah. I don't really care about that. He can not like a game. He's more than earned, the respect of a lot of people in the games industry, from developers to journalists to content creators, influencers, all that. He's earned his voice, and no one should dispute that. And there's people who are just pushing back on just the fact that he doesn't like the game, and that's stupid. The pushback that's happening that I think is a little more interesting, and it's not just about him. It could be for any content creator, and kind of what I was just talking about, this whole rage bait, engagement bait kind of influencer world we live in now. A lot of the pushback on him is just that he's just always contrarian, and he is. And I've talked about this before, more privately or in our Discord and things like that. But like, with rare exception, if a game comes out and it's universally liked or disliked, he will almost always have the opposite opinion. And he especially likes to not like games that most people like. And that's fine. But there does come a point where you do that for long enough. And I think it's fair for people to start to be like, dude, like, do you really feel that way? Or do you just know it's good for your wallet to be that way? That's good for your podcast. It's good for your YouTube channel. Like, do you really feel this way? Like, because it's gotten to the point that, and I would even say from my own experience, like, there's been times where I've seen his reviews on games, and I've seen this with other people too. It's not just him. Where like, I straight up don't know if they finished the game. like Hellblade 2, which I honestly don't even remember his review for that. But there were other people who like reviewed Hellblade 2, Senua's Saga, who like, I played the whole game and I loved it. I thought it was great, especially the second half of the game. I watched reviews or heard people on podcasts talk about that game and claim that they finished it. And it wasn't a long game. It was like 10 hours. Where I genuinely don't believe they played the second half of the game, because many of the complaints they had were definitely complaints I would have had as well about the first half of that game. And so you start to like, you start to see the cracks in people's kind of personas and the way they handle this stuff. I'm not alleging that with him. I'm sure he played Ghost of Yotei and maybe just didn't like it, made a video saying that and moved on. Like, and if anyone thinks that people calling him a contrarian is going to change anything, he's just going to double down. So don't think that he's going to like put out a video being like, oh, I'm sorry, maybe I'm a little contrarian. That shit ain't going to happen. Like, that is never happening. He is never going to do that. And, to a point, props for him. But it has been interesting that, because there's a lot of people who he's like the only reviewer they think is truthful. And I think there was a time where he was definitely the most like analytical reviewer when he started, basically when he branched off of The Division, and his early videos where he was a more general content creator definitely had more depth and more thoughtfulness to him, and more like, trying to look at things from a broader view. I mean, I would just personally, for the most part, besides a few exceptions, I can't listen to his podcast anymore. His reviews, like, when someone gets to the point where what their takes are going to be on something, and that is pretty much always true. For me, at least, it's hard to keep listening to those people. I like to be at least on edge a little bit to see what someone's going to think about something. But I just kind of found this to be interesting. At the end of the day, Yotei is going to sell really well. It's going to be a big fan favorite for PlayStation users. It'll come out on PC in 2 to 5 years. It'll sell okay on there, but it won't run very well. And then they'll put out another one. So thus the release cycle of PlayStation first party games. Not very often, but when they come, they typically are received well, despite any controversy like this. It goes away pretty quick, as I was talking about before. We have kind of a cool update for Clair Obscur Expedition 33. They've sold 5 million copies. They did a big social media push and blog updates and all this stuff. They announced the 5 million copies sold, and also talked about how they will be putting out more content. I think it's in early 2026. To kind of celebrate it. And they've been like kind of hinting for a while that there's going to be more. They've talked about more dungeons, more enemies, more combat things and things like that. I assume either, there's not really an end game to Clair Obscur. There's a third act that you can kind of treat like an end game, but in theory, you do eventually have to end it without being too spoilery, I guess. This is awesome. This is still my game of the year at this point. I'm gonna be pretty surprised if anything's gonna knock it off. I actually want to jump in and play it some more again, just to be like, oh yeah, this is freaking awesome, even though I still know that. There was a funny occurrence this week where the Golden Joystick Awards posted all their nominees, and Claire Obscur wasn't on either their PC or console game of the year list. And there were like multiple games that it's kind of strange they were on there. Like I think it was like Monster Hunter Wilds or whatever the new Monster Hunter game is, which is liked, and the people in that community love it. But I also know that, you know, or at least I've seen that people in that community are also like, oh yeah, I'm glad it's I play a ton of that game. It's also crap. Like it's not like, you know, for optimization and things like that, which has probably been fixed up a bit by now, but still, yeah, there was a lot of people being like giving like side eye to the Golden Joysticks of being like, look, like it doesn't have to win, but it's any game of the year nomination list this year that doesn't have Claire Obscur on there it's at least interesting. Maybe, you know, it'd be nice to know why. You know, we've had a crazy year, and I think what's interesting is this year, I don't think there's, outside of like a Claire Obscur or maybe one or two other games, there haven't been any games I've like, oh my God, this is a 10 out of 10 game. Just a bunch of really good 9 out of 10s. And that's why I think game of the year could be kind of interesting this year. We had a PlayStation exclusive with, you know, Death Stranding 2, even though it's not a first party necessarily. We've had now the Ghost of Yotei come out with to be a first party for PlayStation. We've had a handful of Xbox games come out, and we still have like the Outer Worlds 2 to come. You know, and then a bunch of third-party games that people have really enjoyed, and it's going to be an interesting year. The indies will be the one that will really be interesting to see. You've got games like Blueprints and things like that. We'll see how those shake out. I suspect a lot of those games lost steam pretty quickly after they came out, even though they were big hits when they first released. But maybe enough people will have that in the back of their minds. We still see some of those games sneak into nominations. It's just, at the end of the day, Claire Obscur, I'm super happy for them to sell 5 million copies, because you have to keep in mind, it seems like they got a pretty good deal from Xbox for Game Pass. Even though it released on all platforms, they were day one Game Pass. That with this kind of game probably was pretty lucrative for them. And it makes you wonder how many copies they even needed to sell to just break even. It probably wasn't that many. And I bet at 5 million, they're probably sitting very pretty. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see information from them sooner than later being like, hey, we're working on our next game because we're flush with cash and we want to make more, and also hit while the you know, strike while the iron's hot, as they say. So good for Claire Obscur, good for that whole studio, good for all the people who like that game. I'm still rooting for it for Game of the Year. We'll see what happens in the next couple months. The PlayStation 6 could be expected as soon as 2027 or 28. Mark Cerny, kind of the head of the technical division over there at PlayStation, and one of the big AMD names, put out a video this week, basically just talking about all the possible technologies, all the technologies they're trying to prepare to have on the next gen of the console. It was really interesting because they even said it, like, and it was even posted this way of like, this is all like speculative tech. And it's just like, they do this all the time and they never catch any crap for it. But what they did a lot of focus on things like frame gen and frame generation, things like that. A lot of kind of pretty high scale tech that is in like the 5090 and some of the real high end cards right now that are like $2,000. And they always do this. They've done this in previous generations too, where they're like, you know, with ray tracing and all this stuff, where it's like, you know, the Xbox Series X and S and the PlayStation 5 have ray tracing in some games, and it's like bad. Like there's very few games that do it well. Insomniac is a studio that seems like they do it really well, but they also, from what I've seen in Digital Foundry videos and stuff, they're very creative with how they make it work, which is great. You know, games are just illusions, you know, never forget that. But this whole thing, it was just, it's cool. It's cool to see platforms, especially the one that sells as well as PlayStation does, talking about the next gen. I always think it's exciting. Some people think it's too early. You know, some of these rumors, Mark Cerny says like something in, you know, the new console in the next few years, or I'm paraphrasing that, but, you know, leading people to believe that probably isn't coming next year, may not be coming in 27, could be 28. I've pointed out that like they just released the PlayStation 5 Pro. They want that to sell for a while, or even the base PlayStation 5 for a bit longer. All these consoles got a slow start because of COVID. And now things are a little weird because of tariffs and things like that. It's hard for them to get new hardware in affordably, and they can't lower the prices like they have in every other gen after 3, 4, 5 years, right? So that's been kind of weird. I think they're going to hold off on that as long as they can, because it wasn't until pretty recently that there were even more PlayStation 5 players than PlayStation 4. Like that balance only tipped over in the last few months, I believe. So I'm curious how quickly they're really going to move on this, because they kind of don't have any reason to move on. They have barely put out games so far that have fully utilized their own console. Like, we're still probably 1, 2, 3 years away from them, fully utilizing their own hardware or fully understanding how to utilize it. Right. So it's like one of those things where, I think the push for Xbox to do a new console sooner than later makes way more sense, because they kind of seem like they're trying to get out of that rat race of the, every gen putting out a new console or whatever. I don't think PlayStation has that pressure. I mean, we've seen what Nintendo did, where they just released arguably a last gen console, and it's selling like crazy. It's selling faster than the first Switch, and they don't care. Like, they have that established fan base. They're good. They're gonna sell a bunch of those. They're in no fear of not selling enough consoles, right? PlayStation's, I don't think, in the same situation, because their next console is probably going to be $600-700. That's going to be a harder sell than 400 or 500 was this last gen, and kind of forever. Back to like PS3, which was like crazy times with the prices of consoles. And so I think this is very likely. I think the rumors of 27, 28 make the most sense. It is funny that every time he does these like technical talks, Mark Cerny is a billion times smarter than I'll ever be, especially when it comes to this stuff. But it does kind of crack me up how he still doesn't shy away from the PR talk and stuff. I think, and maybe this is my bias coming into play, definitely could be, they have such a knack for taking non-proprietary tech and just being like, and like slapping their own name on it and being like, yeah, this is ours. We did this. With the PlayStation 5 Pro, the PSSR tech, which is their upscaler, similar to like NVIDIA's DLSS or AMD's FSR and so on and so forth. They have PSSR, which was really sold as like the big selling point for the PlayStation 5 Pro, because it's not that much more powerful than the Series X, and it's only a little bit more than that, more powerful than the PS5. This upscaler was the big deal. And what we've kind of found was that PSSR, at least in its initial iteration, was just FSR 3.5. It was just AMD's upscaler with some features of 4 put onto 3, which is cool. Like, that's a cool thing. FSR 4 has a lot of really great advanced features, and 3 is okay. And so that's great. It's exciting that they did that. But they can't just call it FSR. They had to call it their own thing. And I think we see that, in this talk, he talks about all these technologies they're working on. These are very likely just technologies that AMD is working on for all of their hardware, whether it's an Xbox or a PlayStation or a PC, like it doesn't seem like there's anything really unique happening here, even if that's the way they present it. That never gets pointed out. That never gets talked about, whatever. It doesn't matter. We've had that conversation already. Either way, I think it's cool to see this happening. And I'll be really interested to see, there's rumors that the Xbox next gen could come as soon as 26. If them having a year or 2 years of room between them and the next PlayStation, just kind of how that affects the industry. They're not going to suddenly outsell the PlayStation, right? Like, I don't think so, at least, especially if the next Xbox is what people have been saying it might be. It might be $800-900. Like, it could be a very premium device, not meant to sell 50 million units, meant to sell 15 or 20, right? While people move to other platforms to play on their PlayStation games on, or their Xbox games on, and PlayStation, I don't know, everything. So it's interesting to see some PS6 rumors already. They definitely seem to be capitalizing on a bunch of the conversations going on, and you can't blame them. Ubisoft has reportedly canceled a post-Civil War Assassin's Creed game that would have had a former slave as the protagonist. Supposedly they've done this because in the current political and cultural climate, they don't think it's a good idea. And I guess that some sources specifically cited the reaction to the African character in Shadows, which is just so frustrating, because that means that this vocal minority of losers on social media and in the gaming influencer community and so on and so forth scared this giant billion-dollar publisher away from making a game that sounds awesome. Like, I'm sorry, like Red Dead Redemption 2, being able to, mess up a bunch of clan members is one of the best parts of that game. It's so fun. Like, seeing them at night, you're riding through the, on a road and you see a bunch of, torches in the forest and you can go out there and just blow them all up. It is the best because, racists suck, Nazis suck, all that stuff, they're all the worst, right? And this shying away from doing what sounds like a really interesting way to do a game, a post-Civil War Assassin's Creed game, I think sounds awesome, especially with like the gadgets and the tech that you could include. It's so cowardly, and it's so ballless, man. And maybe this deal that they recently made with Tencent, which put Assassin's Creed under this like joint subsidiary venture of a development studio group, maybe that's why. Maybe Tencent, it was a big reason that they probably want to avoid such controversy. This is just, man, it sucks. Like, because I think this sounds awesome, but maybe I'm wrong. Halo veteran Glenn Israel has left Halo Studios. This is kind of on my previous topic, ranting about how Xbox gets covered differently or anything related to Xbox. This was weird. So this guy who's been with working on Halo games for almost 20 years made this big post on LinkedIn being like real cryptic and real weird and being like, if anyone know that just basically being real hyper negative about the industry in general, obviously seeming to focus a lot of his ire on Halo Studios and maybe Xbox in general. If you read it though, and this again, I always try to acknowledge my bias as someone who would probably be considered an Xbox fan. I'll just say that his whole thing read so much to me like someone who was having serious issues with individual people, like personal level issues in that studio. Maybe it was power struggle stuff or something. I don't know. Like, and it just seems like someone who, like, he knew if he posted this, it would get a lot of attention, and believe it or not, it is. It's so, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we're going to find out, because he even said something really ominous. Like, we'll find out a year from now, like stuff like, so he's at least alluding to that there's something big happening next year with Halo Studios. Now, is that going to be they're going to announce the game on PlayStation 5, the Master Chief Collection, or they're going to announce the next Halo, and there's going to be something about it that's really controversial and that maybe a veteran wouldn't like, or maybe something else. Maybe he just didn't like a decision they're making that he knows will come up, or maybe they're talking about like shutting down Halo Studios. I don't know. It's so cryptic and it's so vague, and it just so read to me like someone being like, people know who I am and I know who I am, and if I post this, it's gonna get so much attention. And it definitely is. What's funny about it is that they say he's been there 17 years. Like, wow, that's crazy. And then you think about like the last 17 years of Halo, and you maybe get a little less nostalgic for it. Like, I can't remember if that I imagine Halo 3 was around that long ago. So, he was there at, the tail end of their quote unquote good years of Halo, even though that wouldn't have been Halo. That would have been, that wouldn't have been Halo Studios or 343. That would have been obviously Bungie. But it's funny because Infinite, I liked Infinite. I thought it was a fun game. I just didn't think it was the best Halo. I saw people today posting about like, look at all these Infinite developers that aren't even at the studio anymore. And it's like, y'all didn't like Infinite. Like, so now all the people who made it are gone. Like, shouldn't you be happy? Like, I see this with BioWare as well, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But like, everyone hates Anthem and Andromeda and Veilguard. And so now all the people who made those games are gone. And the people making the next Mass Effect are like people who worked on like the trilogy. And people are still mad. It's just like, you can't win for losing sometimes with this stuff. I feel like it's just, I don't know. This will be a really interesting one to look back at a year from now. I guess maybe Glenn left and he's heard some really awful stuff that's coming down the pipe for that studio or for Xbox or whatever. And maybe all this stuff gets justified. I suspect we're going to find out from like a Schreier article or something here in a few months of like, he got like accused of something awful, or something, someone did something to him that was really crappy, and this was like an emotional reaction. I don't know. We'll have to see which way it goes. And this will be one that I suspect we're going to hear more about eventually. Speaking of Battlefield coming out, Call of Duty has seemingly been impacted by it in some capacity. So they made a bunch of announcements this week, or we're a couple weeks away from Black Ops 7 coming out. And they've obviously been dealing with, having, a Battlefield game coming out at the same time and marketing really well and being really enjoyed by a lot of people. Even, some of the Battlefield marketing targeting Call of Duty specifically. And now they have made a bunch of changes. One of the biggest ones being removing, at least mostly, skill-based matchmaking. This is a topic that, like with Battlefield, the topic is weapons locked to certain classes or not. And it's the dumbest conversation on earth, at least to me. I don't understand why anyone cares about it, but they do. And so that is what it is. The skill-based matchmaking is the other one. If you remember X Defiant, that Ubisoft shooter game, everyone was flocking, everyone, quote unquote, was flocking to that game because it didn't have skill-based matchmaking. This is where when you matchmake into a multiplayer game, it tries to find people with similar hours, kill death ratio, the whatever skill level, however they measure that to you, and it puts you in servers with those people to create a more competitive environment, and for newer players to be able to learn the ropes of the game and play other newer players and so on and so forth. I think it's a fine system. I think most of the people who hate that system are more experienced players who want to just dunk on newbies, who want to have some guarantee that every round there's going to be 2 or 3 people worse than them. Maybe not. Maybe people really just want a true open experience. It's the libertarian video gamer or whatever. Well, for whatever it means, the Black Ops 7, they basically worded it like it's for the most part not going to affect matchmaking. Battlefield 6 is doing something similar. They've said that there is skill-based matchmaking, but they're trying to make it where it won't just be straight up like every single person in a server has to have the same kill death ratio or experience or whatever. That it seems like they, that it's trying to target latency and things like that first, to give people a good experience, and then on the back end to try to make sure that try to make games not completely uneven in the way they put people together. We'll see how that plays out in the long run. There's also things they mentioned, like persistent servers to a point. So like basically it doesn't have a new set of players in every round. Every time you play Call of Duty, if people stay, you keep playing against them. So that's kind of neat. That's been something I thought was always in Call of Duty. So maybe it hasn't been recently. I haven't played a ton of Call of Duty multiplayer in recent years. There is another probably reason behind this as well. And this goes back to that Game Pass discussion a bit of, a Bloomberg article came out in this last week talking about how supposedly Black Ops 6 lost $300 million. I read it and I saw some analysis of it. It seems like that article, it may be true. Black Ops 6 may have sold 300 million less than expected, or 300 million less than if it wasn't on Game Pass. That kind of seems like what was being alleged. Supposedly the source on this was someone at Xbox, because it always is, and maybe it was, who knows. But it also doesn't seem like this was like, someone who in this journalist laid out a bunch of documents and was like, look. Instead, it was just someone being like, yeah, that lost 300 million, which doesn't take into account well, how much more money did it make? Yeah, sure, it lost in maybe physical sales or whatever, or one-time purchases, right? But what did it gain with new signups on Game Pass and things like that? That's the problem with Game Pass and Xbox's whole strategy, is that it's so easy to manipulate the numbers to make everything look bad or good. You could probably do it either way. And it's just the traditional games journalist don't know how to approach it, because it's not just cut and dry. If someone bought Game Pass for 1 month to play Call of Duty, that was probably bad for Xbox. So it's needing to know, did the majority of people do that? Or did the majority of people who got Game Pass keep it for 3 months or 4 months or 6 months or still have it, right? Because that was good for Xbox. That's the goal, right? You want people to come on and, for a big, game like that, and then stay, and then it becomes worth it. But if 80% of players jumped on, played it for a month, and then stopped paying for Game Pass, they lost out on quite a bit of money that way. So it's This reporting is always kind of weird, but maybe it was true, but it may explain a lot of the things going on with Call of Duty right now, whether it's because of Battlefield or because of lost revenue last year. But we'll have to see what happens after everything that's changed this year. Hey, a few quick stories here. Tarkov has a passive aggressive patch before their 1.0 release later this year. Nikita, who's the head of Battlestate Games, who makes Tarkov, is like one of the most like thin-skinned developers I've ever seen. And I've been playing that game for 6-7 years at this point. And this dude just cannot handle people, criticizing him or his decisions or his game. And so a few months ago, they did a wipe. This is where they wipe your account. You start from scratch. There's a few exceptions now. They've added some prestige things, but for the most part, every 6 months or so, Tarkov has a big patch. They add a bunch of new stuff and they wipe your account and you start over. Well, they did that a few months ago. I think it was in June. And they did what was called a hardcore wipe. And they made the game way, way, way harder. Like they made things way harder to find. You lost things way easier, like all that. The problem was a lot of the hardcore parts of it is, like say in the previous times for some upgrade or some, game progression, quest progression, you would need like 2 of a fairly rare item. Well, for the most part, this hardcore wipe was them just making that 4 instead. Like it was a really lazy difficulty spike. And some of the things that made it like really stupidly hard. And they caught a lot of criticism for that, for the laziness of it. Not necessarily the hardcore part of it. A lot of people wanted that, but the way they did it was just kind of sucked. And so people, I assume, have continued to chirp at them and all that. And so literally just like a month or 2 before they do this full release, where they should be dialing in the game, fixing bugs, because it's still a complete hot mess of a game in general. Instead, they release what, from my reading, literally is a passive aggressive patch. They have simplified everything in the game, made everything a million times easier. And it's literally been presented. It's been called a softcore patch. Like literally them being like, well, we want you, apparently you kids want this to be easier. So here it is. Here, the game's easier than it's ever been now. And it's weird because it like feels really passive aggressive. Like it's so strange for this, this game, that game has made a ton of money. And there's a lot of issues with how that money is handled, potentially with who is making this game, where they're at, who they are affiliated with, and so on and so forth. But I still just thought I had to talk about for a minute about how I've never seen, at least so far, a game developer release what appears to be like a passive aggressive patch. But here we are. Arc Raiders has talked about their wipe system. So we're talking about wipes with extraction games. So they're doing something kind of interesting. It's going to be optional. So basically, it kind of seems like it's going to be more of like a prestige system. So Arc Raiders is going to have a system where you level up, you quest, you do everything, and you hit a max level. And you can keep just playing at that forever, it sounds like, if you want. But what they're going to do is they're going to give you an opportunity to do, I think it's called an expedition. And that basically it does a wipe. And every so many weeks or months, the rewards for wiping, for doing that expedition and starting over will change. And what those rewards will be like permanent buffs to your character and things like that. So this seems like it's kind of like the prestige system that Tarkov has, but way less punishing, at least in my opinion. I'll be really curious how this works out. It seems like they are trying to please the really serious players who will do, who will prestige or wipe or, do this expedition as soon as they can every time. And the more casual people who just want to jump in a couple of times a week, play it, not lose all their progress, and have to grind it over and over again. It seems like a good system. I'm super excited about Arc Raiders. I'm a little worried Arc Raiders is going to get lost in the fray of Battlefield and Call of Duty and some of these other games that are coming out. But I think it made enough of an impression when it did their testing, and they're doing another test here in a week, that I think it'll drum up enough support. I don't think it's going to be the biggest game that's ever been out there, but I think it will find a nice, consistent player base, and they'll monetize it, and they'll do the live service thing. And I think it definitely has a good potential to be able to keep going for a long time. And finally, we have less than a month until N7 Day 2025. This is BioWare's fan celebration of Mass Effect in the last few years, at least since 2020. This has also been when they typically tease or straight up reveal or whatever information about the next game. Obviously, with the things going on with EA and with just over the last few years with layoffs and other things at BioWare, the release of Veilguard last year, which wasn't quite as lucrative as EA probably wanted it to be, and that putting the studio in some kind of weird spots. This is going to be an interesting one. I truly believe, like, I've seen people be like, oh, they're not going to have anything. In 2024, they basically showed nothing. There was almost nothing new besides some small teases with like cosmetics and Veilguard. I've seen a lot of people being like really downplaying what this N7 day could be. I actually am in the opposite camp, knowing that EA acquisition is happening very likely in April. Even before that acquisition was announced or happening, BioWare's kind of on the ropes a little bit. I fully expect this N7 day for them to just show everything they've got, like where they're at. Like, here's a bunch of concept art. Here's what we're thinking. Maybe even like story, character wise, like, you know, very, maybe probably extremely vague, but potentially throwing out what they've got. Because whether it's to just continue existing at EA or maybe exist under another publisher, I think this is probably their last ditch chance to be like, hey, here's what we're doing. Now see how our fans react to it. You know, look, like the people want this. So if EA doesn't want it to do it, maybe someone else will, or it will convince EA to go with it. At this point, my gut feeling is still that EA will let them finish their work on Mass Effect, and then we'll see what happens then. Because I don't think, like, people think that, you know, the next Mass Effect is 4 or 5 years away. I don't think no matter what was going on, BioWare was going to get that much time to make this game. I fully expect them to have unfortunately, probably very compressed production cycle with this game, and it to be out way faster than people expect, for better or worse. I think it will. That's tough, right? But maybe the pressure puts out a diamond. I don't know. Either way, I'm keeping the optimism up. I'm keeping that, you know, whatever, the glass half full, and I'm excited to see what they show us on N7 Day this year. I think especially after last year of them being like, hey, it's going to be a slow year. We're excited to show you more stuff in the future. I'm hoping with everything that's going on, this will be an opportunity for them just to lay it out on the table and be like, hey, this is what we're doing. Get excited, you know, hopefully. And this is where we will do some content updates. So I did a Fun and Games podcast appearance. They have a little mini podcast series that they do. So go look up the Fun and Games podcast. It's where they give people 5 to 20 minutes to just talk about a game series that means a lot to them. I picked The Division, and I barely talk about The Division in it. I talk about what The Division meant for me as a person in my life and people I met and things I got to do. And I'm really proud of it. I'm really happy about it. And I'm glad that I was allowed to do that. So go check that out. As I talked about in N7 Day, there at the end of the gaming news, I have multiple videos out already, doing some speculation, some looking back at everything we've heard. I have more videos coming in the coming couple weeks. And then on N7 Day, I will be streaming that day, and after that, be covering whatever they show us, if it's anything, right? There is also a new episode of the Mass Effect Hypecast coming out, talking about EA's acquisition, a video that Mark Dara made, a former BioWare dev, as well as an article from Insider Gaming that maybe gave us some insight into how people are feeling at BioWare. I did a whole episode about that, so be sure to check that out here in the coming week. And that is where we are going to wrap things up this week. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Thank you to everyone who supports as YouTube members or Twitch subscribers. If you are interested in supporting this podcast and all of my other content, please check out the links in the show description. If you have Amazon Prime, give me that Prime sub over there on Twitch. I would really appreciate it. If you have questions or feedback, hit me up on social media at Bondiesel or at the Baunfire. Join my Discord via the Linktree link in the video description or the episode description, and comment on Spotify or YouTube. I do respond. I respond to every person, for the most part, who comments on either of those platforms, unless you're a jerk, and then I hide you and I never see you again. So keep that in mind. That is all I have for this episode of the Baunfire Gaming Podcast. So until next time.